The woman stumbled through the dusty main street of Bentonville, Arkansas, her hair whipping wildly around her face as the afternoon wind kicked up clouds of red dirt. And every person she asked for help turned away with polite excuses or uncomfortable silence. Alina Brennan had arrived in this frontier town 3 weeks ago with nothing but determination and a canvas tent that now lay in tattered pieces somewhere across the plains, torn apart by last week's violent thunderstorm that had roared through the region like an angry god. She clutched her worn carpetbag tighter against her chest, feeling the weight of everything she owned pressing into her ribs. The late summer heat of 1876 beat down mercilessly, and sweat traced lines through the dust on her face. Alina had spent the past 7 nights sleeping in the corner of the general store's covered porch, waking before dawn to avoid the shopkeeper's wife, who had made it clear that charity had its limits. Her back ached from the hard wooden planks, and her pride had worn thinner with each passing day. The town was small but growing, with new buildings going up alongside the older structures that had weathered decades of storms. Cowboys and cattlemen filled the saloons each evening, their laughter carrying through the streets while she huddled in the shadows. She had come west after her father's death back in Missouri, seeking the independence and opportunity that everyone spoke of with such conviction. But the reality had proven far harsher than the dream. Alina stopped in front of the boarding house for the 3rd time that week, knowing full well that Mrs. Patterson would give her the same answer. The rooms were full, and even if they were not, a woman traveling alone without visible means of support was not the kind of tenant they preferred. The unspoken rules of frontier society were as rigid as any back east, just dressed in different clothing. "You look like you could use some water." The voice came from behind her, deep and measured, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent years under open skies. Alina turned to find a tall man watching her with eyes the color of creek stones, gray-green and steady. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. A bandana hung loose around his neck, and his face was tanned and weathered from constant sun exposure. He held the reins of a large bay horse that stood patiently behind him, its flanks dark with sweat. "I am fine, thank you," Alina said automatically, though her throat was parched and her lips cracked from dehydration. The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "No offense intended, miss, but you do not look fine. You look like someone who has been sleeping rough and skipping meals." Heat flooded Alina's cheeks, part embarrassment and part anger at how transparent her situation must be. "My circumstances are my own concern, sir." "Quinn Hartley," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "And I meant no disrespect. I just recognize the look of someone who has had a run of bad luck. This country can be unforgiving to folks who find themselves in a tight spot." Alina wanted to maintain her dignity and walk away, but something in his tone lacked the judgment she had heard from so many others. "Alina Brennan. And yes, I have encountered some difficulties recently." Quinn glanced toward the boarding house, then back at her. "Let me guess. Your tent blew away in that storm last week, and nobody in town will rent you a room because you are a woman alone without a husband or family to vouch for you." The accuracy of his assessment startled her. "How did you know about the tent?" "I found pieces of it tangled in the fence line on my property about 5 miles north of here. Canvas with the initials EB stitched in the corner. I figured someone had lost more than just fabric in that storm." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I have a cabin on my land. Nothing fancy, just a single room, but it has a solid roof and walls. I also have a barn that is clean and dry. You are welcome to stay in either until you get yourself sorted out." Alina stared at him, certain she must have misheard. "You are offering me shelter. You do not even know me." "I know you are in need, and I have the means to help. That seems reason enough." Quinn shifted his weight, his horse nosing at his shoulder. "Look, I understand if you are wary. A woman has every right to be cautious about a stranger's offer, but I give you my word that I mean you no harm. I will stay in whichever place you do not choose, and you can bar the door from the inside." The sincerity in his voice made Alina's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. After so many rejections, such simple kindness felt almost overwhelming. Why would you do this for someone you do not know? Quinn's expression softened. "Because 7 years ago, I was the one sleeping rough after I lost everything I owned in a fire. A family I had never met took me in and helped me get back on my feet. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to do the same for someone else, I would not hesitate." He gathered his horse's reins. "The offer stands, Miss Brennan. No obligations, no expectations. Just a safe place to sleep until you figure out your next step." Alina felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She had cried enough over the past week, and she refused to break down in the middle of the street. "I would be very grateful for the barn, Mr. Hartley. I do not wish to take your home from you." "Quinn," he corrected gently, "and the barn it is. Let me finish my business at the feed store, and we can head out. It is about an hour's ride, but my horse can carry double if you do not mind riding behind me." They left Bentonville as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Alina sat behind Quinn on the big bay horse, her carpetbag secured to the saddle, trying not to notice how warm and solid his back felt against her hands where she held on to keep her balance. The landscape rolled past in gentle waves of prairie grass dotted with clusters of oak and hickory trees. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermal currents, and the air smelled of dust and dried vegetation. Quinn kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. He had purchased his land 3 years ago and had been building up his small cattle operation ever since. He ran about 50 head, which was modest by the standards of the big ranches farther west, but enough to make a decent living. He also broke horses for extra income, training them for ranchers who needed reliable mounts. "You have family back in Missouri?" Quinn asked as they followed a narrow trail through a stand of trees. "Not anymore," Alina said, her voice quiet. "My father passed 6 months ago. He was all I had left after my mother died when I was 14. We ran a small dry goods store, but when he died, his debts came due. I sold everything to settle what he owed and had just enough left to travel west and start over." "That takes courage," Quinn said. "Most people would have stayed where they knew folks, tried to make it work somehow. There was nothing to make work. I had no skills beyond keeping shop books and mending clothes. The choices were to become someone's unpaid housekeeper or come west where people say there are opportunities for those willing to work hard." Alina paused, remembering the hope she had felt when she boarded the train. "I suppose I was naive about what those opportunities would look like." "You were not naive, you were hopeful. There is a difference." Quinn guided the horse around a fallen log. "What kind of work were you looking for in Bentonville?" "Anything, really. I can read and write and cipher. I can sew and cook and clean." "I thought surely someone would need help, but every position I inquired about had already been filled or required references I could not provide." The frustration bled into her voice, despite her efforts to sound composed. They emerged from the trees onto higher ground, and Quinn pointed ahead to where a small cabin sat in a clearing with a barn and corral nearby. The buildings were simple but well maintained, built from rough-hewn logs with stone chimneys. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, bordered by cottonwood trees that rustled in the breeze. It was modest, but to Aliner's eyes it looked like a paradise after sleeping on a store porch. Quinn dismounted and helped her down, his hand steady on her waist. "Welcome to the H Quarter," he said with a slight smile. "Named for my initials, though I admit it is not very creative." Aliner looked around, taking in the neat corral fence, the vegetable garden beside the cabin, and the chickens pecking at the ground near a small coop. "It is wonderful. You have built something real here." "I have tried." Quinn led the horse toward the barn. "Let me show you where you will be staying, and then I will get you some supplies from the cabin." The barn was larger than she had expected, with 3 stalls for horses and a loft above for hay storage. Quinn had clearly been using it for more than just animals. One corner had been set up with a workbench and tools for leather working and equipment repair. He led her to the back stall, which was empty except for fresh straw on the ground. "I know it is not much," Quinn said, sounding almost apologetic, "but I can bring you some blankets and a pillow, and there is a lantern you can use for light. The straw is clean, and it will be warmer than sleeping outside." "It is perfect," Aliner said honestly. "Truly." "This is more than I could have hoped for." Quinn nodded, looking relieved. "I will be right back with those supplies and some food. You must be hungry." He returned shortly with his arms full of blankets, a thick pillow, a lantern, and a basket covered with a cloth. Aliner watched as he arranged the blankets over the straw to create a makeshift bed that actually looked comfortable. He hung the lantern from a hook on the support beam and set the basket nearby. "There is bread, cheese, some dried beef, and apples in the basket," Quinn explained. "Help yourself to whatever you want. I will bring breakfast out in the morning, and we can figure out a more permanent arrangement for meals." Aliner felt overwhelmed by his generosity. "I do not know how to thank you, Quinn. You have shown me more kindness in one afternoon than I have experienced in weeks." "No thanks needed. Just glad I can help." He moved toward the barn door, then paused. "Bar the door after I leave if it makes you feel safer. I will understand completely." After he left, Aliner did slide the wooden bar into place, not because she feared Quinn, but because she needed to feel some sense of control after so many days of vulnerability. She opened the basket and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The food was simple but satisfying, and she could have wept at the luxury of a full stomach. As darkness fell, she lay on the makeshift bed and stared up at the barn's rafters, visible in the flickering lamplight. Exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind would not settle. She kept thinking about Quinn Hartley and his unexpected kindness. He had helped her without hesitation, without demands, without the judgment that had met her at every turn in town. It seemed almost too good to be true, and years of hard lessons had taught her to be wary of things that seemed too good. But as sleep finally claimed her, she found herself hoping that maybe, just maybe, she had finally caught a break in this unforgiving frontier. Aliner woke to golden sunlight streaming through the gaps in the barn's wooden walls and the sound of chickens clucking nearby. For the first moment in over a week, she felt rested. Her body still ached from the accumulated stress and poor sleeping conditions, but the softness of the blankets and the security of 4 walls had allowed her to truly sleep. She heard movement outside and tensed, then recognized Quinn's voice speaking soothingly to his horse. After checking that she was presentable, she unbarred the door and stepped out into the morning air. Quinn was in the corral working with a young chestnut mare that danced nervously at the end of a long lead rope. He moved with practiced ease, his movements calm and deliberate as he worked to settle the skittish animal. He had not yet noticed Aliner, and she took a moment to observe him without self-consciousness. He handled the horse with patience and skill, never forcing but always guiding, his voice a low murmur of encouragement. "She is beautiful," Alina said when there was a break in the training session. Quinn turned and smiled, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "She will be once she settles down. Right now she is all nerves and uncertainty." He walked the mare in a circle, letting her calm. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in quite some time. Thank you again for your hospitality." "Good, I am glad." Quinn secured the mare and climbed out of the corral. "I made some breakfast if you are hungry. Nothing fancy, just eggs and biscuits." They ate on the cabin's small porch, sitting on the steps with their plates balanced on their knees. The morning was cool enough to be pleasant, and the view across the property toward the distant hills was peaceful. Alina found herself relaxing in ways she had not been able to since leaving Missouri. "What are your plans?" Quinn asked between bites. "I do not mean to pry, but if you are looking to stay in the area, it might help to know what kind of work you are seeking." Alina had been thinking about this very question through the night. "Honestly, I am not certain anymore. I had thought I might find work in a store or perhaps teaching if any families needed help with their children. But it seems there are more people looking for work than there are positions available." "That is true in town, but out here on the ranches and farms, it is different. People always need help, especially coming into fall when there is harvesting and preparing for winter." Quinn set his empty plate aside. "I am not saying I have answers, but I do know folks in the area. Maybe I can ask around, see if anyone needs assistance." "I would appreciate that, though I do not want to impose on you more than I already am." Quinn shook his head firmly. "You are not imposing, and if I am being honest, I could use some help around here myself. I have been letting things slide because there are only so many hours in a day. The garden needs tending, the chickens need better management, and I have about 3 months of mending piled up that I keep ignoring." Alina felt a spark of hope. "I could help with those things. I am actually quite good with a needle, and I know how to manage a garden. My mother taught me before she passed." "Then maybe we could work out an arrangement," Quinn said carefully. "You help me with the household tasks and garden work, and I provide room and board. It would not be much in terms of wages, but at least you would have a safe place to stay and regular meals while you figure out your next steps." It was a practical solution, and Alina knew she should accept immediately. But something held her back, some lingering concern about propriety and what people would say. Would that not cause talk? A single woman living on a single man's property. Quinn's expression became serious. "It might. People talk no matter what anyone does. But if it concerns you, we could tell folks in town that you are helping me as a housekeeper and staying in the barn as a worker, which is the truth. Or," he paused, seeming to debate his next words, "we could say you are my cousin from Missouri, come to help me manage the property. That might quiet the gossips more effectively." "You would lie for me?" Alina asked, surprised. "I would tell a small falsehood to protect your reputation and give you a chance to get established without facing judgment," Quinn corrected. "There is a difference. And honestly, I do not see how it is anyone's business but ours how we arrange our affairs as long as we are both being honest with each other." Alina studied him, trying to understand this man who offered help so freely. "Why are you really doing this, Quinn? I know you said someone helped you once, but this seems like more than just repaying a kindness." Quinn met her gaze steadily. "Because I see someone who is trying hard to make an honest living and being punished for circumstances beyond her control. That does not sit right with me. I have been fortunate these past few years, and I have more than I need for just myself. Sharing what I have does not diminish me. It just means someone else has a better chance at building something good." He stood and picked up their empty plates. but I want you to feel comfortable with whatever we decide. Take some time to think about it and let me know what feels right to you." He went inside, leaving Alina alone with her thoughts. She looked out across the property, watching the chickens scratch in the dirt and the mare grazing peacefully in the corral. It was a simple life Quinn had built here, but it was solid and real, and he was offering her a chance to be part of it, at least temporarily. By midday, she had made her decision. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm that surprised Alina with its ease. She woke with the sun and tended to the chickens, collecting eggs and ensuring they had fresh water and feed. Then she worked in the garden, weeding and watering and harvesting vegetables that had been growing wild without consistent attention. Quinn had planted more than he could manage alone, and she found satisfaction in bringing order to the chaotic beds of squash, beans, and tomatoes. In the afternoons, she worked on the enormous pile of mending Quinn had accumulated. Shirts with torn seams, pants with holes worn through the knees, socks that needed darning. She set up her work area on the cabin's porch, where the light was good and the breeze kept her cool. Quinn would return from working with the horses or checking on his cattle and find her there, needle flashing in the sunlight. They talked while she worked, and he completed his own evening chores. At first, the conversations were superficial, but gradually they grew deeper and more personal. Quinn told her about growing up in Texas, the son of a ranch foreman who drank away every dollar he earned. He had left home at 16 to make his own way, working cattle drives and odd jobs until he saved enough to buy his land. The fire that had destroyed everything he owned had been caused by a lightning strike, and he had rebuilt from nothing through sheer determination and the kindness of the family who took him in. Alina shared her own history, the happy childhood with loving parents that had been shattered by her mother's sudden death from pneumonia. Her father had never fully recovered from the loss, throwing himself into work to avoid his grief. She had run the household and helped in the store, learning to be self-sufficient because there was no other choice. His death had been expected in some ways. He had simply worn himself down to nothing, his heart giving out one quiet evening while he sat in his favorite chair. "You miss Missouri?" Quinn asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "I miss what it represented," Alina said slowly, trying to articulate feelings she had not fully examined. "I miss the security of knowing where I belonged and what my role was, but I do not miss the place itself, if that makes sense. I felt trapped there toward the end, like I was living someone else's life instead of my own." "That makes perfect sense to me," Quinn said. "I felt the same way before I left Texas. Sometimes you have to leave behind everything familiar to find out who you really are." Alina glanced at him, taking in his profile against the fading light. Over the weeks, she had come to appreciate more than just his kindness. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard with its timing. He worked harder than anyone she had ever known, but he also knew when to stop and appreciate the beauty around him. And he treated her with respect that never wavered, never presuming on their living arrangement or making her feel uncomfortable. She realized with a start, becoming quite fond of him. Quinn must have felt her gaze because he turned to look at her, a question in his eyes. "What is it?" "Nothing," Alina said quickly, feeling her cheeks warm. "I was just thinking that I am very fortunate to have met you." A slow smile spread across Quinn's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "I was just thinking the same thing about meeting you. This place feels different with you here, more like a home than just a place to sleep between work days." The air between them felt charged with something Alina could not quite name, but before she could examine it further, Quinn stood and stretched. I should check on the mare before it gets full dark. She was favoring her left front leg earlier, and I want to make sure she did not pull anything." He left, and Alina sat alone, her heart beating faster than the quiet moment warranted. Something was shifting between them, a gradual change that felt both exciting and terrifying. She had not come west looking for romance, but she also had not expected to find someone like Quinn Hartley. The first frost came in mid-October, covering the ground in a delicate layer of white that melted as soon as the sun touched it. Alina stood in the garden harvesting the last of the vegetables before the killing freeze that would inevitably follow. Her hands were cold despite her gloves, and her breath formed small clouds in the morning air. Quinn came out of the barn leading the chestnut mare, who now moved with confidence instead of fear. He had spent weeks working with her, and the transformation was remarkable. "I am taking her to the Robertson place today," he called to Alina. "They are the family that bought her. I should be back before supper." "Be careful," Alina said, straightening from her work. "Those clouds to the north look like they might bring weather." Quinn glanced at the sky and frowned. "You are right. I will try to finish up quickly." He swung into his saddle, leading the mare with a rope. "If I am not back by dark and it starts to storm, do not worry. I will likely just stay at the Robertsons until it passes." But he did not stay at the Robertsons. He returned just after sunset, riding hard with the wind picking up behind him and the first drops of cold rain beginning to fall. Alina heard the horses and ran out to help, holding the barn door against the gusting wind as Quinn led both animals inside. "That came up fast," Quinn said, breathing hard. "I left as soon as I saw how the sky was changing, but I barely beat it here." Thunder rumbled overhead and the rain began in earnest, hammering against the barn's roof. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and Alina could see Quinn shivering in his wet clothes. "You need to get into dry things before you catch pneumonia," she said firmly. "I will in a minute. Let me get these horses settled first." Quinn began removing the saddle from his bay. Alina grabbed a towel and started drying down the chestnut mare, working quickly to prevent the animal from catching a chill. They worked side by side in companionable silence, both focused on caring for the horses before themselves. Lightning flashed through the gaps in the barn walls, followed almost immediately by deafening thunder that made the horses nervous. "Easy now," Quinn murmured, stroking his bay's neck. "Just a storm. You have been through worse." Once the horses were dry and settled with feed and water, Quinn finally allowed himself to acknowledge his own discomfort. His teeth were chattering, and his lips had a bluish tinge. Alina felt a surge of concern that went beyond simple worry for a friend. "Go to the cabin now and change," she ordered. "I will bring you something hot to drink." She had been using the cabin's kitchen to cook meals, with Quinn's permission, and she quickly heated water for tea while he changed in the small bedroom area he had curtained off for privacy. The storm raged outside, rain lashing the windows and wind howling around the eaves. It reminded her of the storm that had destroyed her tent, and she felt grateful beyond measure for the solid roof over her head. Quinn emerged wearing dry clothes, his hair still damp but his color better. Alina handed him a cup of hot tea, and their fingers brushed in the exchange. The simple touch sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the storm's electricity. "Thank you," Quinn said softly, "for helping with the horses and for this." He raised the cup in a small salute. "You would do the same for me," Alina replied. "You have done far more, actually." They stood in the cabin's main room, the space feeling smaller and more intimate with the storm raging outside. The single lantern cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the warmth from the fireplace wrapped around them like a blanket. "Alina," Quinn began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how to say it properly." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "These past weeks with you here have been the best I have had in years. Maybe ever." Quinn set his cup down and took a step closer to her. "At first, I told myself I was just helping someone in need, repaying the kindness that was shown to me. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. You became more than that." Alina could barely breathe. "Quinn, let me finish before I lose my nerve," he said with a slight smile. "I know this is not how things are supposed to be done. I should probably court you properly, take you to socials in town, ask your father's permission if he were alive. But we are not living a conventional situation, and I have never been good at pretending things are other than what they are." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I have feelings for you, Alina, strong feelings that grow deeper every day, and I wanted you to know, even if you do not feel the same way." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his expression, broke through the last of Alina's defenses. "I do feel the same way," she whispered. "I have been trying to tell myself it was just gratitude, but it is so much more than that. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in ways I never have been before." Quinn's face lit with joy and relief. "Truly, truly." Alina stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I think I started falling for you the day you found me in town and offered help without hesitation. Every day since has only made me more certain." Quinn raised his free hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. "May I kiss you?" Instead of answering with words, Alina rose on her toes and closed the final distance between them. Their lips met softly at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Quinn's arms came around her, holding her close, and Alina melted into his embrace. The storm outside seemed to mirror the tumult of emotions inside her, everything wild and fierce and right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this properly," he said. "I want to court you and marry you and build a life together, but only if that is what you want too." "It is," Alina said without hesitation. "Though people will talk. Let them talk." Quinn kissed her again, softer this time. "I love you, Alina Brennan, and I do not care who knows it." "I love you too, Quinn Hartley." The words felt both strange and completely natural on her tongue, as if she had been waiting to say them her entire life. They spent the rest of the evening talking, making plans for their future while the storm gradually blew itself out. Quinn wanted to expand the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and perhaps another room for children someday. Alina wanted to increase the garden and maybe add some fruit trees in the spring. They talked about everything and nothing, their hands intertwined, stealing kisses between conversations. When the hour grew late, Quinn walked Alina to the barn through the muddy yard, holding a lantern to light their way. At the barn door, he pulled her close for one more kiss. "Sleep well, my love." "You too," Alina murmured against his lips. She lay awake long after he left, her body humming with happiness and her mind racing with possibilities. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours, and yet nothing had changed at all. She had been falling in love with Quinn for weeks, she realized. Tonight had simply allowed them both to admit what had been growing between them all along. Quinn rode into Bentonville 2 days later with Alina sitting beside him on the wagon seat, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. They had decided it was time to make their relationship public and to start the process of planning a proper wedding. Alina felt nervous about facing the townspeople who had rejected her just weeks earlier, but Quinn's solid presence beside her gave her courage. Their first stop was the general store, where they needed supplies and where news spread fastest. The shopkeeper, Mr. Davis, looked surprised to see them together but greeted them politely. His wife was less subtle, her eyebrows rising almost to her hairline when Quinn introduced Alina as his fiancée. "Well, that certainly happened quickly," Mrs. Davis said with barely concealed disapproval. "When you know, you know," Quinn replied calmly, his hand resting protectively on Alina's back. "We would like to purchase some fabric for a wedding dress, if you have anything suitable." The mention of a wedding dress rather than just living together seemed to mollify Mrs. Davis somewhat. She brought out several bolts of cloth, and Alina selected a deep blue cotton that would be practical for frontier life while still being beautiful enough for a special occasion. As they continued through town, stopping at the feed store and the smithy, word spread quickly. Some people offered genuine congratulations, while others were clearly skeptical. Alina held her head high, refusing to show how much the judgment stung. She had done nothing wrong, and neither had Quinn. At the small church at the edge of town, they found Reverend Matthews working in his vegetable garden. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, and he listened thoughtfully as Quinn explained their situation, and asked if he would perform the ceremony. "How long have you known each other?" the Reverend asked. "About 6 weeks," Quinn admitted. "But I know my own heart, Reverend, and I know Alina is the woman I want to spend my life with." Reverend Matthews turned to Alina. "And you, Miss Brennan, you are certain about this decision?" "More certain than I have been about anything in a long time," Alina said firmly. "Quinn is a good man and I love him," the Reverend smiled. "Then I would be honored to marry you. When would you like the ceremony?" They settled on a date 3 weeks away, giving them time to make preparations and for Alina to sew her dress. As they left the church, Alina felt lighter than she had in months. Everything was falling into place, the future she had not dared to hope for suddenly within reach. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Alina worked on her dress in every spare moment, stitching by lamplight in the evenings while Quinn worked on expanding the cabin. He was determined to have a proper bedroom finished before the wedding, and he attacked the project with focused intensity. The sound of hammering and sawing became the soundtrack to their days. Neighbors began stopping by, some out of genuine friendliness and others out of curiosity. The Robertson family, for whom Quinn had trained the chestnut mare, brought a beautiful quilt as a wedding gift and invited them both to dinner. Mrs. Robertson was a warm woman with 5 children, and she took Alina aside at one point during the visit. "Do not mind the gossips in town," she said kindly. "Quinn is respected out here among the ranch families. We all know he is honest and hardworking. Anyone would be lucky to marry him, and he is clearly lucky to have found you." The acceptance from people like the Robertsons helped ease Alina's worries about being an outsider. The frontier community was not as rigid as the society she had left behind in Missouri, she discovered. People cared more about character and capability than about following every social convention. The night before the wedding, Alina lay in her barn bed staring up at the rafters, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow she would become Quinn's wife. Tomorrow her life would change completely. She heard a soft knock on the barn door and smiled, knowing who it would be. "Come in," she called. Quinn entered, carrying a lantern, his expression almost sheepish. "I know it is bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, but I could not sleep, and I wanted to see you." Alina sat up, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "I could not sleep either, too much excitement." Quinn sat beside her on the makeshift bed, setting the lantern nearby. "Are you having any doubts? Because if you are, we can wait. There is no rush." "No doubts," Alina said firmly. "None at all, are you, not even a little one?" Quinn took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I just keep thinking about how different my life would be if I had not gone into town that day, if I had not seen you standing in front of the boarding house looking like you were carrying the weight of the world. What if I had just ridden past? But you did not, Alina said softly. You stopped and you helped and you changed everything for me. You changed everything for me too, Quinn said. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions of building something without really thinking about why. You gave me a reason, a purpose beyond just surviving. They sat together in comfortable silence, hands clasped, until the lantern began to burn low. Quinn finally stood reluctantly. I should let you get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Alina stood as well, rising on her toes to kiss him goodnight. I love you, Quinn. I love you too, Alina. I will see you at the church. He paused at the door and looked back, his expression full of such tenderness that it made her heart ache. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for asking, Alina replied. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt like a blessing. Alina woke early and bathed in the creek, the cold water shocking her fully awake. She dried off and returned to the barn to dress, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned up the blue dress she had worked so hard to complete. Mrs. Robertson arrived mid-morning with her daughters to help Alina with her hair and to provide moral support. They pinned her dark hair up in an elegant style, weaving in some late-blooming wildflowers that one of the Robertson girls had picked. When Alina looked at herself in the small mirror Mrs. Robertson had brought, she hardly recognized the composed, happy woman staring back at her. You look beautiful, Mrs. Robertson said warmly. Quinn is going to forget how to speak when he sees you. They rode to the church in the Robertson family wagon, the children chattering excitedly about the wedding. More people had come than Alina expected, filling the small church's pews. She recognized many faces from town, some friendly and some merely curious. But when she walked through the door and saw Quinn standing at the front beside Reverend Matthews, everything else faded away. Quinn wore a new shirt she had sewn for him, dark brown that brought out the green in his eyes, and his hair was neatly combed for once. But it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen, his love written plainly across his features. Alina walked down the short aisle on Mr. Robertson's arm, since she had no family to perform the traditional duty. But she barely noticed, her eyes locked on Quinn's. When she reached his side and took his offered hand, she felt like she had finally come home. Reverend Matthews performed a simple but beautiful ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the importance of partnership in building a life together. When it came time for vows, Quinn's voice was strong and clear. I, Quinn Hartley, take you, Alina Brennan, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your shelter against whatever storms we may face. This I swear before God and these witnesses. Alina's voice shook slightly with emotion as she repeated her own vows, but her words were no less sincere. I, Alina Brennan, take you, Quinn Hartley, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and build a life with you based on trust and respect. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your home. This I swear before God and these witnesses. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn pulled Alina close and kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the women in the congregation sigh audibly. Alina kissed him back, pouring all her love and joy and gratitude into that single moment. The celebration afterward was held at the church hall, with neighbors contributing food and well wishes. There was fiddle music and dancing, and Alina found herself swept into the festivities. She danced with Quinn, with Mr. Robertson, with several other ranchers who wanted to welcome her properly into the community. Quinn barely left her side, his hand always finding hers in the crowd, his eyes constantly seeking her out. As the sun began to set, they finally made their excuses and headed home. The cabin glowed warmly in the dusk, smoke rising from the chimney where Quinn had left a fire burning. He lifted Alina down from the wagon and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" Alina laughed, clutching his shoulders. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Quinn said, grinning. "It is supposed to be good luck." He carried her into the cabin, which he had cleaned thoroughly and decorated with more wildflowers. The new bedroom was finished, complete with a real bed instead of the narrow cot he had been using. Fresh linens covered the mattress, and the quilt from the Robertsons was folded at the foot. Quinn set Alina down gently, his expression growing serious. "I want you to know that we can go as slowly as you need. There is no rush for anything." Alina cupped his face in her hands, touched by his consideration. "I am your wife now, Quinn. I want this. I want you." They came together with a passion tempered by tenderness, learning each other in the privacy of their marriage bed. Quinn was patient and careful, making sure Alina felt safe and cherished. And Alina discovered a depth of intimacy she had never imagined, the physical joining somehow making their emotional connection even stronger. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the quilt, Quinn's fingers tracing lazy patterns on Alina's shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," he murmured. "It almost scares me, like it is too good to last." "It will last," Alina said firmly. "We will make it last. Whatever comes, we will face it together." "Together," Quinn agreed, pulling her closer. "I like the sound of that." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretching before them, full of promise and possibility. The first year of marriage brought both challenges and joys. The winter was harder than Alina had expected, with snow that drifted high against the cabin walls and temperatures that made simply staying warm a full-time occupation. But the cabin that Quinn had expanded proved solid against the elements, and the supplies they had carefully stockpiled kept them fed. In the long winter evenings, they played cards and read aloud to each other from Quinn's small collection of books. Alina taught him some of the songs her mother had sung to her, and Quinn taught her the constellations visible in the clear winter sky. They grew to know each other in the deep way that only comes from sharing space through difficult times, learning each other's moods and habits and preferences. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle gave birth to healthy calves, and the garden burst forth with seedlings that Alina had started indoors during the winter. Quinn began training new horses, his reputation growing among local ranchers who needed good mounts. Alina expanded her sewing work, taking in projects from neighboring families who were willing to pay for quality mending and alterations. By summer, they had saved enough money to purchase additional cattle, expanding the herd to nearly 80 head. It was backbreaking work, but they labored side by side, Quinn doing the heavy physical tasks while Alina managed the household and contributed wherever she could. She learned to ride well enough to help move the cattle between.